most of these months, I think 20 of the 28 months that Biden has been in office, you have had wages growing at a slower rate than prices. That is, things are getting expensive faster than our wages are going up. And so that's really what makes it so painful, is that they say, oh, well, the inflation is slowing down. Well, my salary hasn't caught up, or my hourly wage hasn't caught up to what I'm able to pay. So you're really digging us out of a hole that we went into in your first 2 years. That's the perception of the average American.
Welcome to the Debrief, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the headlines they're covering this week and where the story's going next. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by senior political columnist Tim Carney. Tim, the Biden administration, the president in particular, have been saying they have a good story to tell on the economy, but a lot of people seem to not be buying it. What seems to be the disconnect between some of this aggregate data that Biden is selling and public perceptions of the economy?
So the first thing is that the numbers they got in August was that the year-over-year inflation rate had actually increased. It had gone down to 3 and it ticks up to 3.2. But if you think about that, 3% year-over-year, and that's your good month. First of all, that's more inflation than the highest month in the Trump years, or then probably in the Obama years as well. So 3.2, 3.0 is a lot of inflation year over year for most adults right now. What we've had in our working career has not been that much. But then also, when we were up 9%, 6%, the aggregate in the Biden years is 17%, the consumer price index. So the average thing costs you 17% more today than it did on the day Biden was sworn in. That's the story, that it's not as bad today as it was a year ago. That isn't that great, because we're still feeling the pain that our groceries are so much more expensive than they were in 2020.
Right, and 2020 is obviously not that long ago. So that does seem to be a part of the whole Bidenomics story that they don't seem to be very eager to tell. They're very focused on, once being 9%, now being 3%, but your groceries still cost more.
And the COVID analogy could be that the death rate got a lot lower at some point, but still a lot of people died. Or a wildfire is smaller, but still it's on fire now and it wasn't on fire before, and a lot of stuff has been destroyed. So the aggregate is a big part of it, that some categories are worse than others, that people who want to buy a new car are paying through the teeth, that housing is one of the places where things have been so bad. And then finally, most of these months, I think 20 of the 28 months that Biden has been in office, you have had wages growing at a slower rate than prices. That is, things are getting expensive faster than our wages are going up. And so that's really what makes it so painful, is that they say, oh, well, the inflation is slowing down. Well, my salary hasn't caught up, or my hourly wage hasn't caught up to what I'm able to pay. So you're really digging us out of a hole that we went into in your first 2 years. That's the perception of the average American.
And it's interesting because Biden is old enough to remember the 1992 presidential election, where Bill Clinton was elected running against a recession that had actually ended technically before he'd even declared his candidacy. But the after effects, the aftershocks of it were still very evident to people.
No, and if things have recently been bad, then the perception of things being bad remains. So again, we had 9% year-over-year inflation at one point recently. That was really bad. So to say, oh, well, now it's less bad, but still worse than any point in the Trump era, that's why people won't believe it. If somehow in the next year and 3 months before the election, inflation is basically zero, people might buy Biden's story, but right now they're not.
Now, is there a risk, assuming it doesn't get to zero, is there a risk in what Biden is doing to sort of repackage and resell the economy, that he'll seem out of touch?
Yeah, so that's absolutely one of the problems. So if you can point to some top dollar economic figure and say, well, this is good, but the experience of the average American is still economic struggling, then it's saying, okay, maybe life is good for you and your buddies, Joe, but for average Joe, it's not. He's a non-average Joe.
That's right. Obviously, more Americans need to be talking about the weather.
Yes, so that's what Joe Biden wants, to change it to the weather, which I sometimes do when the topic becomes uncomfortable.
Thank you, Tim. You could read Tim and the rest of our commentary team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.